Welcome to another session in this course. You see, when you have your table inside a database, there are some informations you need to know about that table before you start working with the table. And we call these table attributes, or let's say column attributes for a particular table. In this session, I am going to be showing you how you can understand and identify the common column attributes of a particular table. And also, I will be teaching you the primary key and the foreign key and the difference between these two important attributes of your columns and table. So, let us get at it. We are still with the SQL course database. Let's click on the tables. Let us look at the credit card table. Like I said before, when you click on this table icon, it will run a query that will show us everything in the table. We are not doing that now. Look at this panel icon. When you click on it, it is going to give you a page where you will see the attributes of our table. And here we are going to be talking about the primary key and the foreign key first. Let's start from here. Use the table name, credit card, that is the name of the table, the encoding and co. And then if you look at this place, you see the column name. All the columns in this table will be shown here. And the attributes of each column is represented here. For example, this is the card ID. We have the data type, and then we have all of this. So when you look at a particular column and you see this icon looking like a key, this is the primary key. Now, what is a primary key? A primary key is actually a column that we use to represent each record in the table. For example, if we have customer name, there are two customers who can have the same name. How do we differentiate them? The only way to differentiate them is to have a number or an identifier that is unique to each customer. And that is where the primary key comes in. This column now, the card ID, is a primary key which contains values that uniquely identify each record. The second thing we want to look at here is the data type. So here now we have integer as our data type. I will still speak about this as we continue. Then we have the primary key. Everything here is also represented in this aspect here. We have the primary key. So if you want this column to be the primary key, you must click on this. Immediately you click on primary key, you will see that this NN, this is not null, will also be checked. What does it mean? It means that for each record in the primary key column, you want a record there. You do not want a null value because each record must have a unique identifier. Sometimes you want to click on auto increase so that as you are adding your record, the auto increase is just adding a new identifier as you are recording or updating your table. But here I won't put auto increment. I will just use the primary key and the non-null. Another thing we want to have is the default value. The default will only be applicable when we can allow null values. So that if we put a record in a column and there is no record in a particular space, what should be the default expression there? Should we put null? Should we put zero or something? That is how this aspect works. If I come to the credit card type, this is another column, you can see that the data type here is text. And here is not a primary key. You can only have only one primary key in a column. When you have a table and the record in that table are unique, that is when you can put a primary key. You cannot put a primary key in a column or in a table where the records are duplicated. It's not possible. That is what takes us to the foreign key. But before we go on, let's check the customer table. I click on the tool icon. So when you see the customer table, you can see that each customer also have their ID. This particular table contains customer ID as a column, customer name, gender, location type, city, state, and so on. The customer ID is an integer, and other ones are text. And you can see that the customer ID is also a primary key and non-null because we don't want a null value in this particular table, which means that Every record in the customer table is also unique, and you can understand why we have that, because we can only have one type of customer. We cannot have two records representing one customer. So one record represents one customer. You can see that the default here is null for all these areas. And then we can also put non-null there, like gender now. We don't want null in gender, we can put it here like this. Now, I have been able to show you the primary key column and also how we can put constraints on our table. These are the attributes. Now let's go to the third table, which is the order table. So you can see it's the orders table. And click on the tool icon. What I want you to see here is that number one, there is also a primary key here, which is the index representing each transaction. The orders table is telling us about each transaction that is made in the organization. You can see the customer ID, the card ID, and then the credit card type, and so on and so forth. What you should notice is that this particular icon before the customer ID and this icon before the card ID are showing like a golden color, which means that these particular columns are foreign keys. Now, all the other ones are not foreign keys. You can see that they are highlighted in a different manner. Now, the question is, what is a foreign key? The foreign key basically means that when you have a primary key in a particular table, that primary key will be used to represent the record in the primary key table in another table. For example, we have the customer ID in the customer table. If you can remember, we have the card ID column in the credit card table. If you can remember, now in the other table, we now have the customer ID representing each of the customers, the card ID representing each of the cards. So instead of me having customer name, the customer age, and so on, in this orders table, I have everything in the customer table, but I have a unique identifier, like a, a key that is representing each of them. And this here is the foreign key. In short, a foreign key is basically a primary key of a table that is being used to represent record in another table. Primary table is called the parent table. For example, now for the customer ID, the customer table is the parent table because that is where the customer ID is a primary key. But in the others table, customer ID is a foreign key in this table, referencing the customer ID in the customer table. The card ID in this particular table is also a foreign key, referencing the primary key, card ID as a primary key in the credit card table. That is how the primary key and the foreign keys are referenced in Mysql. And this is how we can actually put a constraint on our table. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification icon, and like our videos until we meet in the next one.